Welcome to Debating Metal. As always, I'm Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and my co-host is Chris K. Today, we're starting something we're calling MVP-LVP. The premise is we will choose a number of bands and debate who their most valuable player, MVP, and least valuable player, LVP, is in each band. And today, we're starting with the big four of Thrash, Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax.
When it comes to our favorite bands, we have our favorite person in the band. And sometimes we even have someone we can do without. Today, Kenneth and I are going to discuss exactly who those people are and why we feel they are the most and least valuable members in those bands. In this case, as Kenneth said, we're covering the big four, specifically the classic lineups of each band. And when we're done, we'll give you our big four favorite big four members in order of our favoritism.
So sit back, relax, turn it up to 11, and let the debate begin. Chris, today is a new thing. We haven't done anything like this before. MVP, LVP. So as we just explained what the premise is, this is going to be interesting because this is, again, going back to what I said a few weeks ago or a few episodes ago, put it that way. We're actually going to be debating things. And I think that's where we need to push the show towards. And this one's a really good one because, you know, this entire show, the premise of the show is centered around the big four. And so we're taking the big four and we're breaking them down to who our favorite or our what we feel is the most valuable. It doesn't even have to be our favorite. Who we feel our most valuable player is in that band, and who our least valuable player is in that band. I mean, shit. For me, one of the least guys might be my favorite player. Who knows?
I mean, that's fair. And that's why I thought it was interesting to distinguish that. Like, we talked about what we were going to do for our big four this week, and I said favorites. And to me, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the most valuable person in the band. Sometimes you have an attachment. Like, we just recently talked about Kiss, right? And, you know, my favorite member of Kiss is Eric Carr. I don't think he's necessarily the most valuable member of Kiss, but I really liked the guy, and I liked, you know, his spirit and his his gung-ho attitude throughout the entire time he was in that band. So for me, he was a favorite, but not necessarily the most valuable player.
Exactly. And you know, looking at the names, obviously we know all these names, and the only band that is a 5-piece is Anthrax. So we're looking at 17 people based on the classic lineups. And in the case of Metallica, we're doing the Jason Newsted era, because that was up until the Rob Trujillo era, was the longest running portion of Metallica that didn't change lineups. So, you know, we're looking at 17 guys, 5 in Anthrax, 4 in Slayer, 4 in Metallica, and 4 in Megadeth. And, you know, it's only 4 guys. So who's the least valuable? Who's the most valuable? It could be someone still just as valuable, but he's the least valuable of those 4, you know? So, or 5. So this is going to be an interesting conversation.
So I think we're going in order of the big four, the concerts that they did. So it'll be Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer, and then Metallica at the end. And so we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna go with the classic lineups of the band. So that would be with Anthrax, that's gonna be Joey Belladonna, Dan Spitz, Scott Ian, Frank Bello, and Charlie Benante. I think most people would know that.
I would think most people would know that, but you know,
if you're not a big Anthrax fan, you probably don't.
Right. So,
and I don't mean most people like in life. I just mean most people that listen to the show. Like, I'm not going to call my grandma and be like, you know, what's the classic lineup of Anthrax?
Hey, she better know. She better know.
Oh, she doesn't.
Oh man, we got to quiz her. And that lineup was together for 8 years. I mean, 1985 to 1992.
1984, technically. So 84. Yeah, 84 to late 92. So
it was late 84 to late 92. So yeah, 8 years.
Put out some of their biggest albums: Armed and Dangerous, Spreading the Disease, Among the Living, I'm the Man, State of Euphoria, Persistence of Time. So those are some of their biggest releases.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing with Anthrax, and so I became a fan of Anthrax when I saw the video for, I think it was I Am the Law. It was either I Am the Law or Indians. And I mean, the speed, the attitude attracted me to them right away. I went out and I bought the record. And, the picture on the back is the five guys in the subway, and the subway was something that I was familiar with because I didn't grow up near the subway, but I took it plenty of times to get to New York City. So I was very familiar with it. So there was something about it that just attracted me to it. I had already been a fan of Metallica. I was already a fan of Megadeth. I was already a fan of Slayer. Slayer, not as big a fan. I think Slayer and Anthrax were relatively around the same time. Maybe Slayer first because Rain and Blood came out first. But anyway, I'm a really big fan of Anthrax, and this classic era is obviously the classic era for a reason. I mean, I love the John Bush era, but there was so much turmoil during all those years.
It's true.
And now Joey's back as their singer, and he's been back for 11 years. That's how fast time flies.
It really does. It doesn't feel that long.
No, it's crazy.
This stint has been longer than the first one.
There's so many weird things, like Rob Trujillo's the longest bass player that's been in Metallica. I mean, look, Kiko Loureiro just left Megadeth. How many years was he in there for? 7?
Was it that long? Wow.
Something like that. I mean, you think about it, it's just wow, it's crazy. But I don't know if I'm exactly right on that, but anyhow, so for me, my MVP for Anthrax is Charlie Benante.
Okay.
Now, I love is a relative term. I really, really admire Charlie. I admire Scott. I admire Frankie. The three of those guys, Charlie and Frankie being family, uncle and nephew, and and Scott, they are Anthrax without a doubt. And obviously Scott is Anthrax because it's Scott's band. He started the band. When Charlie joined, it became more solid. Then Frankie came after Neil Turbin decided to fire Dan Lilker. So the three of them have been together since basically 1985, 84, 85. And even Frankie left for a while to join Helmet, and then eventually came back.
I mean, that was pretty short stint.
Yeah, but he left too because he felt. Yeah, it still happened. He felt like he needed to do something different from the band, and they were arguing a lot at that point. There was so much turmoil with the band in the 2000s, or the late 90s and early 2000s, that it's understandable that if the band had broken up, it would have been like, oh, I can see why. With all changing record labels every time they change their underwear, and an album, getting dropped. Literally the day it comes out, the album, the record company goes bankrupt. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't have surprised me if the band would have called it a day back in whatever time period that was in the late 90s, early 2000s.
I mean, didn't they technically break up briefly in 2007?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was considered an official breakup or not. They had their turmoil because you're talking about when
with all that stuff with
Joey and John, or with John.
Yeah, there was the stuff with Joey and John, and then it was like they really didn't do anything for a while, and then they brought in Dan Nelson. And so like there was this period of time where I don't know if they were officially broken up, but they weren't doing anything at all.
I think that period of time was they were basically looking for a singer, weren't in any rush to find a singer.
Mm-hmm.
And they had gone through what they went through with John leaving because they invited Joey back for the Alive, the reunion, and then they fired Joey again, and then they brought John back, and it was just kind of getting ridiculous.
And that was a favor, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, they made a lot of mistakes during that time.
oh, they made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah.
But getting back to the main topic, Charlie Benante, the reason why I consider him the MVP of the band is, obviously it's Scott Ian's band, but not a lot of people, when I say not a lot of people, look, there's a lot of people that consider themselves insiders. There's a lot of people that consider themselves, I know everything I need to know about Anthrax. I know everything I need to know about heavy metal and all that stuff. But if you're not that into it, if you're just a casual metal listener, or you're just a metal listener who listens but doesn't really dive deep into the lives of every single person in every single band, you're not going to know that Charlie plays guitar, and Charlie is one of the is a main songwriter in the band. And it's Charlie who wrote a lot of those classic riffs that came out of the 80s.
Yeah.
And so, and it was funny because he didn't like showing off playing guitar, to the point where I think when I saw them in 1987, in Miami Beach during the Among the Living tour, there's a part in time where they brought Charlie out playing a guitar to play. I don't know if it was "I'm the Man." I'm not sure, because Charlie. No, it wasn't, because he's running around with a hat and a microphone. So there was something. Oh, I believe they played "Living After Midnight" at the end of the show, and they all changed instruments. So Joey went to play drums. I think Charlie was playing guitar. Scott was on bass, something like that. It was everybody switched, and they played like a cover song.
Scott went from rhythm to lead guitar.
So and it's funny because it's I that is literally a memory that just popped into my head right now. I haven't thought about that in quite a long time. And so Charlie, for me, is that valuable player, because he is a huge part of the songwriting process for Anthrax. So yes, Scott is the mouthpiece for the band, but Charlie is the silent but deadly riff killer in that band. So who's your MVP?
All right, so I'm actually going to agree with you. My MVP is also Charlie Benante for pretty much the same reasons you said, but also the man is a phenomenal drummer. I mean, he proved that when doing his part in the recent Pantera reunion shows. But that's not really what we're talking about. But it's just more proof that he is. He is an amazing drummer. Like, to me, when I first heard Anthrax as a kid, I wasn't as much into them, but I had never heard drumming like that. I mean, he's amazing. You look at like, um, you know, Among the Living alone. If you've ever watched a drum playthrough of that, it's incredible. Especially when you think about the context of the time period and things like that. So, he is an amazing drummer. You're right. Like, he's come up with some great riffs. He's a multi-instrumentalist. He's just a funny guy. Like, his attitude is infectious within the band too. So, like, it's for me, when I really thought about it, and what I did, partially through this, was I actually looked up tabs of each instrument to hear. Like, you hear it in the music itself, but it's always also interesting to hear the isolated tracks. And just, when I compared different parts to each other, I was just blown away sometimes, like, just hearing those isolated tracks. So, for me, it's Charlie as well.
While you were talking, I'm sitting there listening to you, thinking about Charlie. I forgot one other really, really important aspect of his contributions to Anthrax. He's also an artist. So
Oh, that's true.
a lot of the artwork, or at least the art direction, was based on his inspirations or his ideas. And if I'm not mistaken, the I Am the Law cover with Judge Dredd is his drawing. And so it's like Persistence of Time, the way the 25th anniversary or 30th anniversary of Persistence of Time is his actual vision of what the cover was supposed to be like, but because they were running out of time and budget constraints, the original Persistence of Time cover is what came out. But the one that came out on the anniversary edition was exactly the way he wanted it, which was the melting clock as opposed to a full round clock. So there's a lot of his vision that's in all of the artwork.
Yeah, he did the Kiss tribute, the Kings among Scotland.
Yes.
Not Kiss tribute music, but Kiss tribute image. That was like rock and roll over.
Yes.
And he's an artist in general, so like you can look up a lot of the things he's done. He's actually a pretty decent artist.
No, he's very good. So that's another thing. So his artwork and his art ideas are also a major contribution to the band. So that is another reason for him being MVP.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So my least valuable player, my LVP for the classic lineup. Now this one, it almost kind of lends itself to being very, very simple. For me, it's Danny Spitz. Now, Danny Spitz, lead guitar player. So all those leads, every single one that you hear on every single Anthrax song from 1984, from Fistful of Metal, all the way up to Persistence of Time and all the live albums, that's all Danny. Okay. So is a lead guitar player the least important player in the band? No, he's actually very important. But when you're coming down to the 5 guys that are in that band, to me, he was he is the least valuable. And Scott convinced the other guys to fire Joey, making Joey the least important player in 1992, 93. But that was a mistake, that they regret now. But something that I guess they had to go through. But for me, Danny Spitz, I mean, his guitar work is great. It's phenomenal. He's a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan. He's a big cartoon guy. He's a big comic guy. And now he's a professional watchmaker, which is pretty cool because he makes some super high end watches. And
that's always interesting to me. Like take such a career divergence into something like that.
Yeah. And his son apparently has autism, so he's been in a band, he's been in a Christian band that they wrote songs about autism and contribute that way. So it's a very interesting career change. He still plays guitar, but his profession is watchmaking now. So that's my LVP.
So I went a different way this time. And so I kind of have to preface this a little bit. So let me say, I guess not preface, but let me just say who it is. So mine in this instance was Frank Bello. And I would say over the years, though, he got to be a much better bassist, and I wouldn't necessarily call him that now. The only reason I do think it was back then was if you listen to, say, the isolated tracks, the bass parts aren't really that interesting in the early albums. Some of them are, but I think he really developed as a player and as a personality. He was younger than the other guys in the band. A lot of the stuff that early on was Dan Loker, who unfortunately was fired from the band due to all the turmoil with Neil Turbin. And it is what it is. Like it worked out how it worked out, and I think Frank is a much better player now. And I really love his personality. Like I loved seeing him when he was on That Metal Show. He's a funny guy as well. But at the time, like it comparatively, I think he had some of the weakest parts in the band. But past that classic lineup, I would probably have a different opinion. I think Dan Spitz's parts were better in general. Like he's a great guitar player. he had a lot of attitude and just like a good feel for the band. A little bit older, so he had that confidence as well. And I think for the classic lineup, for me, maybe the second, after Frank, but yeah, just during that time period for me, it was Frankie.
So you basically you listen to some of the isolated bass tracks from the early albums.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that. I mean, his bass playing to me improved dramatically from I would say State of Euphoria on, because he obviously was doing some incredible stuff from
Agreed. Like
Persistence of Time.
that's really where he started. Like Persistence of Time is the strongest album that he plays on. Um, at least from that classic lineup. Like the stuff he did in Sound of White Noise is absolutely great. And especially like now, like everything from We've Come for You All Beyond, the last two albums like Worship Music and For All Kings, his parts are phenomenal. So like that's what I mean in saying like if you're talking about the classic lineup, I think he's the LVP. But if you were to talk about it today, absolutely not. Like he is not the LVP.
Okay, I see that. I can see that. All right. Well, we veered off, but for me, I mean, Danny's a good guitar player. I'm never going to say he's not. I
Mhm.
just think I don't think for me he did anything that was going to sit there and say, "Oh, he made Anthrax." You know,
No.
so
I mean, to me, the two guys that make Anthrax are obviously Charlie and Scott, but you know that's also very debatable. There's a lot of eras of Anthrax,
yes,
so
yes, there are.
yeah.
All right, so that brings us now to Megadeth, the ever so Megadeth. Why don't you go first for the MVP on this one?
Okay. I mean, for me, it's hard not to pick Dave Mustaine. He's the voice of the band. He's the main songwriter. His solos are fantastic. Obviously, like everything that he did with Marty trading off solos back and forth are amazing. Marty himself being amazing. That whole lineup is just phenomenal. It's really hard to pick, just one in either category because I feel like they were really, you know, um, they were just a solid unit at that time. Those four guys, and Dave is just like he is Megadeth. I mean, and for more than just the reasons of the silly haha, like he he rules the band with an iron fist, and that's true. It is his band. Um, but he's also the sound of the band. He writes so much of the music. He's able to be amazing lead guitarist and rhythm guitarist. And, this lineup put out some of their best albums. So
I mean, I agree
that's it
with
for
you.
me.
I agree with you because I mean, how can anybody else be the most valuable person in Megadeth? Because it has to be Dave Mustaine. Um,
I mean, it could be if you just don't like Dave's voice, right? You might pick somebody else because like let's say Marty Friedman because you'd love his guitar playing or something like that. I can totally understand somebody, but like for me, I love Megadeth, so I'm gonna pick Dave.
right. I mean, for me, it's Dave Mustaine as well, and you know, it's one of those things. Like you said, he is Megadeth. Megadeth is him. And there's no two ways about it. I always question like, when bands become corporations, it's usually a partnership, four guys if in the band or five guys depending, 25%, 20%, whatever it is. I want to know how his worked because his obviously the original band was only together for two albums, right? And then the third album comes and it's a completely different band for two of the players, so 50% of the band is gone. And at that point, is it just him and Junior as a partner? And then the other two guys are hired guns, or how does it come down? Does it change when they put the rest of the classic era lineup that we're talking about now? Is that now become do they reform a corporation? They become a partnership? Who knows? It's
Yeah,
I
I have no
don't know
idea.
how, like, I know the business of most of the other bands because it's kind of obvious, but
Mhm.
this Megadeth one has always been kind of curious for me because it's always been Dave and Dave from the beginning. You know, first two albums were the same band, and then after that, it's been a change on a regular basis. And then all of a sudden, Megadeth puts or Dave puts Megadeth to rest, and Dave Jr. leaves, and then doesn't come back, and then there's all sorts of legal issues, and then he eventually comes back. But he did not come back as a partner, so
Mm.
he was a hired gun. So I don't know, weird thing. But yes, Dave Mustaine is the MVP of that band. It's his songwriting, it's his vision, it's his vocal style. Like you just mentioned, some people might not like his vocal style. I think most people, if they like Megadeth, they accept the vocals because it's Megadeth. That's their style. Sort of like if you
Yeah.
like Accept, or if you like AC/DC, you like it because that's the style you like. If you don't like AC/DC, it's probably because that's just you don't want to hear those kinds of vocals. So like my wife doesn't like Iron Maiden because she doesn't like Bruce Dickinson. I don't know why I haven't.
Blasphemy.
Exactly, but
So we specified before we started with Anthrax who the band was. So just to reiterate, this
oh,
classic lineup was Dave Mustaine on guitar and vocals, David Ellefson on bass, Nick Menz on drums, and Marty Friedman on guitars.
right. So out of those four guys, I chose Dave as well. So for LVP, what do you got?
So this was a really tough one. It was because I went back and forth between two of the guys, and I mean, it's really tough because you think about like I said, this is a really solid unit. These four guys are all immense players. But it boiled down to me to like how interesting the parts were. And you know, for me, Dave Ellefson was like he's so integral to the personality of Megadeth. It's weird sometimes to think he's no longer in the band, but that's just the truth. Like it is that way. And it's no slight to James Lomenzo, great player. I think he fits in very well. But when I think of Megadeth, I think of Dave and Dave. So my choice was Nick Menza. I love his drumming. I think he is a monster drummer. But for me, it was just part of like it's you're not gonna pick Marty Friedman. I mean, Marty is just one of the greatest guitarists of all time. His contributions on these four albums are paramount. And then I thought about with Dave, like I thought sometimes, maybe because you don't hear the bass as much on some of the albums. But no, like those parts are amazing. Like if I listen to it in my car, I hear the bass parts just fine. And they're very complicated, and he plays it like, like a third guitarist sometimes. Like he's an amazing bass player. Even the stuff that he wrote for the new album that he didn't play, like it's great stuff. And so like I really thought about it, and despite Nick being probably my favorite drummer that they've ever had, um, maybe Dirk Verbeuren, ranks up there. But yeah, it was tough, but like I had to go with Nick.
I was contemplating the same thing, and I just started thinking about Nick's drum sound, and the things that he's done with those albums.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love his work on Rust in Peace.
Oh yeah.
It's just amazing, phenomenal drum work. And so I'm like, how do I devalue that per se? For
I know it feels like you're devaluing it when
right,
you say it,
exactly.
but like
So I mean, I must say, Megadeth was the hardest out of the 4 bands for me to pick a least valuable player.
Agreed.
But I chose Junior.
Okay.
Because, for me, Dave Ellefson, um, you're right on when you say his bass playing was just complicated, and he plays it with ease. It's almost like the back of his hand type of situation. But so Nick Menza was a incredible drummer, and the stuff he did every time he was behind the kit for Megadeth, it was just amazing. Of course, Marty, you just sit there and say, well, how could he be the least important? Because his guitar work and his solos were just amazing. But for me, I think with Nick, I mean not with Nick, excuse me, with Dave Ellefson, I felt like, can someone else play his parts? Obviously, someone else can play his parts. Can someone else play Nick's parts? If someone else plays Nick's parts, it's not going to sound like Nick. But I think
That's fair.
if someone else plays Dave's parts, it still sounds like Dave's parts. You know what I'm saying? So
I get that. Yeah.
I think the uniqueness of Nick's playing outweighed the lack of uniqueness on Dave's. Even though Dave is playing complicated stuff, like if Steve DiGregorio was the right, as I said,
DiGregorio, DiGiorgio.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, I was going to say DiGiorno. Like I said, I always forget his name. If he was the original bass player, he would have parts that you have to kind of like figure out and live up to, right? His bass playing is so unique and different, and he was the one who played the replacement parts on the new album. So that's his, he's got such a different style. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from Dave, because Dave is such a good player, and it's like I said, this was the most difficult, because you're talking about 4 guys who pretty much are virtuosos of their instrument and are really, really solid back there.
Yeah.
So, but I picked Dave on that one. Junior.
Yeah, no, I mean it's funny because it's like we're talking about the least valuable player, but they're still all amazing.
Right, exactly.
It's not. It feels, in this instance especially, it feels like you're devaluing one of the players, but it's it's just you got to pick one, right?
Yeah, I'm not trying to do it as an insult. That's for sure.
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
All right.
So what do you got for Slayer?
Slayer.
Let's mention. So Slayer's classic lineup is going to be Tom Araya on vocals and bass, Kerry King on guitars, Jeff Hanneman on guitars, and Dave Lombardo on drums. That would be Show No Mercy, Hell Awaits, Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss, and then later Christ Illusion and World Painted Blood. Same lineup. So what do you have for Slayer?
And he also did that classic band also did the Haunting the Chapel EP.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So for me, this one was weird. This one was a little different. The players are different for sure. My MVP is Dave Lombardo.
Okay.
And that's not to take anything away from Jeff Hanneman, because Jeff Hanneman, I know, is very, very important to the overall feel and style of Slayer. But Dave Lombardo gave Slayer that unique sound behind the drum kit. He has a swing to his playing that is almost how would you say, it's hard to replicate the way he swings, because he's not a classically taught kind of drummer. And plus, since he's Cuban, there's a danceable vibe that's in his DNA that comes out in his music. And so he has a very unique style of playing, and it shows. And because of that, to me, those albums, especially, stuff with, Rain and Blood and then, South of Heaven and Season in the Abyss, those 3 albums most most show that, because I don't know if he was given more freedom or what, but the first two albums, there's this kind of like, you know, the youthfulness you can feel in the first two albums, between Show No Mercy and Hell Awaits, and even Haunting the Chapel. There's a consistency, but when Rain and Blood comes, all of a sudden it's just like, where this drumming is amazing. Plus, it was just a lot more clear, and
Yeah.
you can hear more. The production was so much better on Rain and Blood and South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss, that you can actually feel and appreciate Dave's playing. So that, for me, is the reason why he's the MVP of Slayer's classic era.
Okay. I was kind of laughing because you said there's a danceable, quality to his playing, and it's 100% true, but I was just picturing people dancing at a Slayer concert, and it just kind of made me laugh. um, so my MVP is different. I picked Jeff Hanneman. And I totally see your reason for Dave Lombardo. I mean, like, he's my favorite drummer in Slayer, period. And I agree with pretty much everything you said. It's just, for me, Jeff, like, he's the main songwriter. He was the main lyricist for most of the time he's in the band. You look at, like, say, Rain and Blood. Most of that album was written by Jeff Hanneman. South of Heaven, he collaborated more with Tom Araya, collaborated more with Kerry King. But for the most part, like, he was the guy in that band. When he passed away, that there was a hole left in that band, for real. And it never quite, recovered, because Kerry and Tom didn't get along. Like, they were buds through Jeff, in a way, like, they're if you're a comic fan and you're a fan of, like, old comics, like, the Green Lantern was friends with Green Arrow, and he was friends with the Flash, but the Flash and Green Arrow weren't always the best of friends, and uh, Jeff was kind of that Green Lantern. He was the guy in between that held everything together. And the band, it did continue on past his death, but not for tremendously long, because it just wasn't the same without him. Jeff was a phenomenal player. His riffs are just amazing. His lyrics were great and really set the tone for the band. And for me, he's just, like, when I think of Slayer, like, a lot of people, I think of Kerry. I think of Jeff.
Well, the funny thing about with Jeff, it's funny because he's the lesser of the accomplished guitar players in the band, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Jeff's abilities, because he grew into his instrument where Kerry already was more accomplished, and so Kerry had the better solos, but Jeff's style, because he was more punk influence, caused him to be faster, and it caused him to be harder, and he was the main influence. So it was crazy to think about, him being, quote unquote, the least accomplished of the musicians, having the biggest influence on the band. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a punk influence on those early albums.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even as far as Rain and Blood, there is punk aspects to that. I mean, you listen to just the very start of the album, that like, that riff, that, it's just speed,
Right.
and you're right. Like, Kerry came in with a little bit more flair, but for me, like, when I think of the style of Slayer, it's really influenced by Jeff's playing.
No, absolutely. I mean, and his songwriting, he was a major influence on that songwriting. So it's pretty wild. All right. So the least valuable player for me in Slayer, I think it kind of, if you've listened to this conversation for the last 5 minutes or whatever it has been, we didn't mention this guy too much. And to me, Tom Araya is probably the least valuable player. Although it's kind of weird because he's the voice of Slayer. He's the one that everyone hears. Um, so how is that, how is that being the least valuable player? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to his bass playing. Um, I've never heard what his what his bass playing sounds like. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, most of his bass playing is in line with the guitars. Um, they're not a traditional rhythm section kind of guitars and stuff like that. But at the same time, I've never heard his bass playing. I mean, and when I say it that way, it's like you can hear the bass in just about everything that's out there in metal. A lot of bands, you know, replicate the bass replicates what the rhythm guitar is playing. But there's times where it breaks down and you hear a difference. I
Yeah.
don't think I've ever heard it break down in Slayer where the bass comes out and you start hearing the bass by itself. I mean, I have. Be honest. I have not listened to every single Slayer song out there. There was a point in time where Slayer just dropped off my map, and they're still trailing behind. But I don't think that's in their style to have that kind of breakdown in the song. And I'm not talking about like the typical breakdown like in a new metal song, but I'm talking where there's a break in the song where there's no drums and no guitar and it's just or drums and bass together, you know, that I don't think they have that.
Yeah.
Not when you think about it. So it's hard to sit there and say, oh yeah, unless you're listening to isolated tracks, which maybe you have, I don't know. I haven't gone that far
I have.
so I haven't gone that far to hear his bass lines. But I don't see them being extremely complicated, so I don't know. I could be absolutely wrong, but that's my opinion.
You're absolutely wrong. No, so I went a different direction. So I would disagree a little bit with. I mean, yes, they're not the most complicated parts, but I've always heard his bass parts in the songs. Listening through either speakers or headphones or whatever in my car. The bass part to me rings out pretty clearly. But I can see where you're coming from as well. Like, I mean, the Slayer was a little bit not. It wasn't hard for me, but I can see how different people would have different strong opinions about it, right? Like because each member of the band really does bring something interesting. Like when I think of Slayer, like Tom Araya, like his vocals to me resonate really well with the band. Like I hear him and I know it's Slayer. Like there's no doubt in my mind. Kerry King, he's always been kind of like the image of the band in some way. Like he has the tattoos on his head. He has a very stoic look. He's recognizable. He does interviews, things like that, and like he just has this like great attitude that just is so metal. Jeff, he's the songwriter. He's the guy kind of behind the scenes. But like he was the glue of the band, and like you said, Dave Lombardo just had this style to him that makes them sound unique. But for me, like when I really thought about it, and like I feel like a lot of times that Carey is the LVP to me, because he does have better solos and he does have like really good playing capabilities. But for me, when I think about the sound of Slayer, like I think Dave Lombardo brings more to the table. I think Tom Araya to me is the sound, the voice. He's very unique in his sound, and especially like the way he, the cadence in which he sings. Like I think he has a really unique style to him, and for me, like that scream that in what's the freaking song called?
Is it Rain and Blood or Angel of Death?
Angel of Death. I mean, either one really, but like it's just like that sound to me is like so essential to Slayer. And like when I think about like what part could be replaced by another like skilled guitarist is Carey's part. So it's really hard to pick because I think all four of that lineup, are essential in my love for Slayer. And it really takes nothing away from him because, like I said, like all four are great. But he, for me, is like of the four, I feel like he's the least essential.
I just remembered that I was showing my daughter the other day my Clash of Titans tour book, and I have Kerry King's signature in there.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
because I met him backstage at the Miami Arena during the Clash of Titans, and he was trying to leave, and he couldn't find the right exit door. So we're
Yeah, because you were blocking it with your book.
so he, he was just like, "How do I get out of this place?" And he was looking for his tour bus, but
It's not this door behind me. Can you sign this?
so
No, that's really cool. Like I think like when I think of Slayer now, especially like Kerry King, that to me that's his band, now.
right.
But like back then, if I'm thinking about the classic lineup, this is my opinion of the classic lineup.
No, I get you. I like Kerry. Kerry's a cool guy. I mean, he basically took over Megadeth when Jeff passed away.
You mean Slayer?
Oh, Megadeth. I'm sorry. Slayer. So yes, so he took over Slayer.
For that like week he was in Megadeth, he took
It's
over.
funny. It's funny because I'm looking at his Wikipedia page, and he says formerly of Slayer and formerly of Megadeth. So yeah, no, he when Jeff passed away, he definitely took the reins for Slayer, and was, besides, he became a bigger mouthpiece for Slayer.
Oh, even before that, I mean, he started writing a lot of the lyrics later on. If you're a fan of like the era where they were doing a little bit more new metal, like he really took the reins and started doing a lot of the songwriting in that time period. So it just depends on your favorite era of Slayer. Like Christ Illusion, which I think is a great album. He's the primary songwriter.
Right.
So it just depends on the era of the band, like I said.
Okie dokie. All right, so we're down to Metallica. You knew we were getting there.
So Metallica, if you don't know, James Hetfield on vocals and rhythm guitars, Kirk Hammett on lead guitars, Lars Ulrich on drums, and Jason Newsted on bass. Or not on bass if you're listening to Injustice for All. But yes, everything from Injustice for All through S&M was that lineup of the band. I think in a lot of people's mind, that was the classic lineup that a lot of people grew up with. Obviously, some of the classic albums with Cliff before that, but that was a very short period of time, unfortunately. And then now, I mean, Rob Trujillo has been in the band longer than Jason, but they've put out, far less output during that time. So for us, the classic lineup is the Jason era of the band.
I agree.
So for my MVP, I'm going with James Hetfield.
Me
It might
too.
it might seem like the easy one, and that's for a reason. That's because James is the primary songwriter. He is the artiste of the band, really, in my eyes. He is the voice of the band in many ways. He was the dictator for many years, but he wanted things his way, and he got the sound that he wanted, and that's it was his way or the highway in a lot of ways, and it worked. And they're one of the biggest bands in the world. And when I think of Metallica, I think of and who else does that in the band? Nobody. That's James. But James has a very unique voice. He's an amazing rhythm guitarist, like one of the best in the world. He he's just like he's a cool dude with a great personality too, and that band wouldn't exist without him. Like if you thought of like if you had to lose any member of that band, you could not lose James and Metallica continue on. I mean you could easily debate that you couldn't lose anybody else either. But I disagree. Like I think there's a way to continue on, like I don't think you can. There's some bands like I just don't think you can replace that one guy, and God forbid you ever had to. But like James is that guy. Like he is Metallica in my eyes, and he's just an amazing guy.
No, he's absolutely irreplaceable. I mean, if you believe the rumors that have spread over the years that Metallica was going to fire Lars when they returned home from Europe after the
Mm-hmm.
yeah, after the beginning of the Master of Puppets tour, then you can tell that he was expendable. Obviously, they had fired Dave Mustaine; he was expendable. I think at that time the one person besides James who wasn't expendable happened to be the one who passed away. And that was Cliff. Cliff,
I would agree with that
you-
sentiment. Yeah.
because he was their musical guiding light. I mean, he taught them about composition. He taught them all sorts of different things about how to write songs. But
Yeah.
not just like, I mean, obviously, look, we all know that James wrote, you know, Motor Breath. We know he wrote Hit the Lights, but those are, when you sit there and hear those songs, they're relatively simple. It's when Cliff joined the band where you hear the complexity of songs and the song structures change. It's Cliff's fault that they sold out. I'm just kidding. But that you saw the progression. Now you see Cliff's influence on Ride the Lightning and Master Puppets. Okay. And so so Lars is expendable. So obviously James is not expendable. James is the main riff writer. James is the modern day Tony Iommi. If you want to look at it that way, or
You know, I can see that. I can
or
see
you can
that for
even,
sure.
or you can, if you want
The
to,
American Tony
just the
Iommi.
American Tony Iommi, or he's the thrash Tony Iommi, or you could call him the let's say the 80s or 90s, the modern era of metal, if you want to look at it that way. That version's Tony, whatever it is, because Tony, he bows to Tony. I mean, James bows to Tony, and everyone talks about how Tony is the master riff writer, but no one talks as much about James and his riffing and the riffs that he's come up with. I mean, they're pretty fucking impressive, if you ask me.
I would agree with
So
that. Yeah.
yes, I agree with you and your sentiment. He is irreplaceable in that band. The band, if he was gone, Metallica wouldn't exist. I mean, the voice, the rhythm. Um, Look, we all know that when you look at the songwriting credits, it says Hetfield Ulrich, right? And everyone
Mhm.
sits there and go, "What the hell does Lars contribute?" A lot of people, think, well, he's a songwriter. Well, he wrote the song. No, he didn't write the damn song. He is the one who takes everything, gets the big pile of shit of all the riffs, the big pile of shit of all the different structures that they get on tape, and he's the one who says, "All right, this part goes here, that part goes there. Let's put."
He arranges
Yeah,
things. Yeah.
he is the arranger, but he's also the guy who has to listen to it all. So, um, so he takes James's riff, and he's the one who deciphers with a DE at the beginning. He deciphers.
He doesn't
No,
cipher
he
it.
doesn't cipher it. He deciphers.
That's an inside joke
Yes,
there.
it's an inside joke from our job. Um, and so, yeah, he deciphers all of James's riffs, and that's his contribution as a songwriter. And then, of course, if it's Kirk's riff, then they give him credit for coming up with the riff, a la Enter Sandman. But if you notice, Enter Sandman is written by Hetfield Ulrich Hammett. Okay. And it's because Hetfield didn't necessarily come up with the main riff, but he's the one with all the lyrics. Ulrich is the one who arranges it, and the riff and 3 times in a row, and then a little tail at the end. That's Hammett. So that's how they put that together. The only album that they've ever, all 4 guys got songwriting credits on all 4 songs, or excuse me, on every song in the album. Excuse me, was Death Magnetic. Did you know that?
Oh, really? Okay, I did not know that. No,
they basically gave.
I probably knew that at some point.
They gave each other songwriting credits across the board. On Death Magnetic.
Okay.
So almost like a new band's partnership,
Or like Rush, where they would do that,
right?
even split. Yeah,
Exactly.
I think Mastodon does that as well.
Yes, Mastodon does it. But it's funny. It says all lyrics written by James Hetfield, all music composed by Hetfield, Ulrich, Hammett, and Trujillo, which has not happened. Like so, what was it? Hardwired was the first and only album to not have a single contribution from Kirk Hammett. So that's a another oddity in the songwriting process, to the point where even Trujillo had credit on one song. But anyway, that is an aside that we don't need to keep going into. James Hetfield, yeah, definitely the MVP of that band. So who do you have as the LVP?
For me, and it's I think for me it's pretty easy choice, which is no slight to him again, is Kirk Hammett.
Me too.
So I think Kirk is a great player. He gets a lot of flack for his wah-wah pedal playing. But he has a great attitude for the band. He's an interesting guy. But I think when I really listen to a lot of the music, I feel like a lot of players could do what he does. As far as like with Metallica, what gives him the edge over a lot of other guys though is he is very easygoing, and his attitude I think has worked really well with the band. James is very specific, very particular in what he wants. And Kirk has the right attitude for that. Somebody like Dave Mustaine is an amazing player. He would have never thrived in Metallica because there's too many strong personalities. Today, who knows? Because, people age and change. But those guys at the age they were in 1982, 1983, it would have never worked. But Kirk had the right attitude to fit.
I still don't think it would work.
No, I mean not now. I'm saying like if they were older by the time that they joined together the first time, like things happen differently. People age and they grow and they are different people. But things worked out the way they did, and Kirk came in and he stepped in and he was perfect for the band. That being said, like you said, Lars, he arranges things. His drum playing is not perfect, but what it is it's perfect for Metallica. His sound is so recognizable, being pushed all the way to the front. So many bands have mimicked that. And as much as I like to make fun of Lars, just like anybody else, he is one of the guys in the band that is one of the least replaceable, especially now. If you think about it, yeah, maybe way back then, in the early days, maybe replaceable back then. But by the time you got into the classic lineup, by the time you're already at Ride the Lightning, I think he really isn't that replaceable. And then with Jason, especially when you're talking about the classic lineup, Jason held things together in really tough times. His vocals, like, yeah, obviously they're not on the album, but if you ever went to a concert or have seen a concert when he was in the band, he was very important during the tour doing vocals. Like he had heavier vocals, he played like a heavier style, and he like he did start or Seek and Destroy, things like that where like those are iconic moments of the band now. Jason is far more important than just his playing. And so like for me when I think about like what he brought to the band and even like how much he affected the band upon his leaving, he drastically changed them and allowed them to probably, course correct their lives. Um I think for me like he was just so important to Metallica. So, yeah, it's tough to say because like I really like Kirk, especially like as a person. But for me, he was the LVP.
I agree with you for a lot of the same exact reasons. Kirk gets a lot of flack for being a guitar player who was at one point considered, one of the best guitar players in the world, in the early to mid 80s. But it was he was never a shredder. He was a thrasher, and he was good at coming up with some riffs as well. His his lead playing is ideal for Metallica. And over the years, it's been one of those he's accepted and learned what's best for the song. And yeah, a lot of people make fun of his wah wah playing, but you know what? Not, you know, as much as people make fun of Zach, they don't they make fun of his pinch harmonics, but they still don't. It doesn't take away from the fact that he's an amazing guitar player. You know, so there's lots of things about Kirk that people will sit there and say, well, he's not that great. He's not this. He's not that. And well, first of all, you're not doing it. Second of all, you know, it's he play like you said, he's right for Metallica for so many different reasons. And when they called him up and said, hey, come out here, we're recording an album. And then when he got there, they finally told him you were in the band. Because that wasn't like he didn't even audition. He just,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, do this album, and by the way, you're in the band.
I mean, chemistry accounts for a lot of things,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Like you could have all the best players in a band, but if they don't have chemistry, if they can't function together, then it's not going to work.
Right. You know, not a lot of people talk about the fact that Slash plays a lot of wah wah. Hmm? Okay, so you know, but obviously, Slash is Slash.
He does, but it's still not the
No,
same.
it's not as much as Kirk, but you know what?
The thing with Kirk it's not just there. It's like you can't avoid the sound of his wah wah. Like, yeah, you're right. Slash plays, but he also plays slower. Whereas, like, the wah sound, like, say on, um, oh shoot, what's the name of the song?
Civil War.
No, what's the one where he's playing in the desert on the video?
Oh,
And it's the
November
wedding,
Rain. November Rain.
November Rain, right? Like his solo is full of wah wah pedal, but it's also like it's done in such a way that is a little bit slower and more pronounced rather than wow 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 wow. Like it's
No, I know what you're saying. It's
it's
more
not as
melodic, that's for sure.
yeah, it's not as like in your face. Like the wah wah pedal is almost like he's tapping his foot to the beat. You
Right.
know,
Well, everyone has their signature sound, and
agreed.
that's
Yeah,
Kirk's.
I'm just saying that's why it's more recognizable. Like nobody talks about Slash because it's not the same thing. You know.
Right. Everyone has to remember Jimi Hendrix plays a shit ton of wah as well. So
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
doesn't matter. Um, but I agree with you in the fact that Kirk Hammett would be the least valuable. And when it comes to why it's not Jason, for pretty much the same reasons you said, but I can hear. It's funny. Like you can't hear the bass in "And Justice for All." You quite honestly, you can't really hear it too much in Master of Puppets either, or Ride the Lightning. It's just that because Cliff played with such distortion, and he came out and played lead bass, if you want to put it like that, his bass lines were more distinctive than Jason. So that's why you can hear his playing a little bit more. It cuts through.
Yeah, but you can hear Jason's bass all over Load and Reload.
Oh no, of course. I mean, the production,
it's a whole different story.
But the production was a different story. But like if you're paying attention, you can hear his bass line in one. Why? Because the song is quieter, and there's different parts to it that you can catch the bass line. But when they're just playing rhythm, and he's playing along with James, there's no way to discern his bass line. But that was Bob Rock's goal when he decided to produce the band, was to figure out a way to get Jason to be heard. And if it was for James and Lars, it would not have happened.
That's probably true.
So anyhow, that is our LVPs and MVPs of the big four thrash bands. I got to say this: there's going to be a lot of people out there who listen to this are going to sit there and say, "That fucking guy Kenneth Dean is crazy ass." Because what? How could he be saying that shit? Well, you know what? It's my opinion.
Exactly, and I welcome.
I mean, look,
I welcome the debate.
Yeah, no, I totally welcome it, because people are going to sit there and say, "What the hell are you guys talking about?" Well, you know what? When we do these shows, we come up with a topic, and we really break it down. We try to sit there and really, really think about it and give a thought out answer. These are not just answers, off the top of our head. When you think about certain,
because he sucks.
Yeah, exactly, because he sucks. When you think about those things, it's like, oh yeah, well maybe you're right, and maybe not. And you can still have a difference of opinion, but I want you guys out there listening to have that difference of opinion, not because you think, oh, because he sucks, or because he's cool, but because you really sat down and listened to it and say, you know what? I disagree with you because I think he's this way. Or I agree with you because I think he's this way. That's all we ask. That's all we ask. All right. This brings us to the Big Four. And tonight's Big Four is our favorite musician from the Big Four bands, and it has to be in order. And that's not going to be the title that I'm going to put down on.
No, you have to put that full title.
Well,
that's
like the Steve Harris one was so fucking long.
It's probably like Big Four.
Big Four favorite
members of the Big Four.
I have it down as Big Four favorite Big Four musician.
There you go. That's a good one. Okay.
So, all right. Do you want me to go first? You want to go first?
Sure. Go ahead.
All right. So this is my favorite musician in the Big Four in each of the bands, and then the bands go by from least favorite to favorite. Okay. So number 4 for me is Kerry King. This is my favorite person in Slayer. He's the mouthpiece of Slayer. He's got the look. He's the one who made sure that nobody smiled on stage. So
true.
He is the man behind Slayer. And he's just cool. I like him. And then he's coming out with a new band next year, so hopefully it'll be pretty cool. It's supposedly supposed to sound like Slayer. So, all right, number 3.
I've been hearing that for 3 years now. I need it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, come on already. All right, number 3 for me is Dave Ellefson. He is my favorite member of Megadeth. Just because, dude, he's had to put up with Dave Mustaine for a long time. And now that he's free, he goes to a Metallica show and puts on his Instagram, now I get to wear my Metallica shirts. And he's been friends with those guys for such a long time, but wasn't allowed to really say it publicly. And that's just one of those weird things,
I don't even know if he was not allowed to. It was more of like, let's keep the peace and just not say it. It's not like, I don't think there was a kibosh
Oh
on. I
no,
think it was just the path of least resistance, right?
exactly. But in the end, it comes down to I'm not allowed to say this, otherwise there's going to be a big old argument between me and my
Exactly.
boss. You know?
That was my marriage in a nutshell. So like I get it.
All right, number 2 for me, Charlie Benante from Anthrax. I don't know what it is about me and Charlie. We actually had like an email thing going back in the day when I had AOL, and he's from Yonkers, or actually he's not from Yonkers. They're from the Bronx, but they had their warehouse in Yonkers for a long time, so they were always in and out of Yonkers. So when uh, I got to talking to him via email or chatting with him via email, that was one of the things that we had in common. Obviously, that we were both from the area, so we talked a little bit about that at the time. But then I think the fire happened and all that shit. So it was just really. And I lost AOL. Well, I didn't lose it. I just gave it up. So I never got
You
back.
lost it in the fire.
I lost AOL in the fire. I lost that CD. That CD they give out. I lost it.
The one they gave out like 500 of.
Oh, I know, right? Every magazine you had a copy of AOL. Well, you know what? Netscape Navigator did the same shit too. So, all right.
Oh wow, you're really dating yourself there.
Hey, by all means. All right. And number 1 for me is my favorite big 4 thrash musician is James Hetfield. I have this magnetism towards James. I just really, really admire. I mean, I've never, ever in my life ever said someone was my hero when it came to a baseball player or a musician, because those are the ones that I look up to the most. But
Not even Enrique Iglesias.
no, not even. But so if I was to call anyone my hero, if I was to sit there and say there was a musician that was my hero, it would be James Hetfield. I've just always admired everything about what he's done and does in Metallica. So that's my number 1.
Okay. So my number 4 is Dave Lombardo. I did not pick him as my MVP, but he is my favorite player in Slayer. Player in Slayer. Haha. So he really, for me, makes the sound of Slayer. A lot of the things that you mentioned earlier, just that sound, just it wasn't the same with Paul Ball stuff.
There's
Like,
a
I think
swing to his style. That's the word you
exactly.
use.
Yeah, and it's just like Dave brought so much to establishing what Slayer was and making them have a unique sound. And sure, he didn't have all the songwriting credits and everything like that, but I feel like I've always felt like Dave got a raw deal. Because it's like sometimes you get in your head, oh, I deserve all the credit for this and that, when there's so much more nuance to what makes a band great. And Slayer has never been the same since they didn't have Dave Lombardo. The best albums that they've ever put out had him on there. So, my number 3 is Dave Mustaine. I know, I know you always had issues with them. Like, I know you like Dave, but at the same time are annoyed by him. But I think I kind of understand Dave. Like, and I understand these guys that go through, just so much of wanting everything just right, and it being, your band and your art, and I get it. Dave has his faults for sure, plenty of them, but I can't deny, like, Megadeth is one of my favorite bands. I love the sound, and through every incarnation with different musicians, Megadeth hasn't really changed a whole lot as far as, like, yeah, they've gone in different ways and different styles, and you can point to this album or that album as, ones that go too far out of range. But I mean, just not too long ago, they put out, I mean, what was it, 2012, they put out Dystopia, and wow, that is a long time
God,
ago.
was
Actually,
it that long ago?
was it?
Holy shit!
um, jeez.
Yeah,
But
no,
regard
Dystopia came out in 2016. Oof.
2016. Okay.
Yeah, but still, that's a long time ago. I mean, you're
Oh
already
yeah, that's right. My timeline was off. I was trying to think of where I was at the time it came out. Yeah,
it's
that's
still
right. Okay,
7
so
years ago.
2016. Still 7 years ago. But regardless, 7 years ago, you like a lot of bands reach that far along in their career and you put out an album and it's like I don't really care about the new stuff, but yeah, like for me the last couple albums have been great. So I know Dave has his demons and I always hope that people get through all the things that they deal with. But for me, like I just I like Megadeth so much, and he's just such a huge part of that. My number two went in a little bit different direction for Anthrax. I picked John Bush. Um, you know, John for me was what made me like Anthrax. His voice, his style, that first album with John on it, The Sound of White Noise. It's just for me, it's like a landmark album. And I didn't like Anthrax as a kid, really, and part of that was that I just didn't appreciate Joey Belladonna in the way that I do now. That sound just didn't appeal to me when I was younger. And when I heard, we did a whole episode about this, talking about which version of Anthrax we liked. And it was a very long time ago. But for me, John was that like what brought me into liking Anthrax, and I just like him in general. Like, his stuff with Armored Saint. He's a really cool dude. I've loved every interview I've heard with the guy. And for me, when I think about like what brought me into Anthrax, it was John. And my number one, I had to think about this for a while because I'm just gonna throw out a not really honorable mention, but I was gonna pick Cliff here, and part of that was that like those early albums, talking about Cliff and dealing with friends that I had in high school that had passed away. Part of that was being able to relate on that level. There was some kind of mysticism even in this guy that was such an influence and he passed away. But then I really thought about it, and for me, especially seeing how he's evolved over the years, and who the man that this guy has become through trials and tribulations and all the things that they've gone through. I also picked James. James for me, like you're right, like he's the sound of the band. He is the auteur. Like he is Metallica in so many ways, and it's not just that; it's his journey. Like you go through life and you either let it kick your ass or you don't, because life is really tough. And this guy has just gone through it and he has come out on the other side much better for it. They just put out 72 seasons, and I really, in so many ways, thinks that is James' album. And it's amazing. Like it's so good. I wasn't surprised, and in some level I was surprised to see it was my number one album that I played on my YouTube music account this year. So it's crazy to see, because at one point I thought that would never happen again. Metallica at one point was my favorite band. They're not so much now, but I'm so happy that they have put out an album that I just love, and it's so cool to experience that again, and to kind of like go back and feel so strongly about something that you cared about so much before. So James for me, yeah, definitely number one.
Cool, very cool. I've never. It's so funny. You and I talk about this all the time. Dave Mustaine is. I like the guy, but he drives me nuts. Yeah, I like that. I like your list. John Bush. I've met John Bush. I've hung out with him. He's pretty cool dude. Um, I remember when he joined Anthrax, I was so excited because I really, really liked his voice. I was a big fan of Armored Saints. They had just released Symbol of Salvation, and that album was just amazing. And I'm like, oh, he's perfect for Anthrax because that's what they were looking for, that kind of voice. But you know, from not necessarily from the minute that he joined, but from the minute that the touring cycle for Sound of White Noise was over, Anthrax was in trouble. Actually, before that, even when they tried to release Black Lodge as a single, Anthrax was in trouble because they had momentum different ways, and we've heard about that, and it went sideways almost from the beginning. John joining, and it's kind of like, man, it just sucks because he deserves so much better. So that's our big four favorite big four band members. And I want to remind everyone out there, if you like what you heard today, click like or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you can get our latest episode as soon as it's posted. And while you're at it, leave a review or rating so we know how we're doing in your eyes or ears.
And don't forget to leave us a comment on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new episode. So remember to tune in next time when we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.